They called me a maid in my own family, so I bought the entire resort they vacation at every year, and I let them keep coming until the rules changed. My name is Alexa Chung. I'm 34 years old and currently standing in a ballroom I paid for, wearing a floor-length black dress I bought off clearance last year, listening to my mother-in-law call me the quiet helper, not a guest, not her daughter-in-law, just a helper, someone she assumes works for the resort, maybe restocking wine or checking coats. It would almost be funny if it weren't so consistent. But this year, I don't correct her. I just smile and refill the water pitcher like I've done it 100 times before. And then I disappear into the hallway. Not because I'm hurt, but because I know something she doesn't. I own this place. I live in Seattle, Washington, in a small one-bedroom condo overlooking a bridge most people photograph and never cross. I'm a structural engineer by training and an investment consultant by trade. Most of my 20s were spent working on coastal infrastructure projects no one remembers until a storm hits. I've always liked stability, things that hold, things that don't collapse when people lean on them too hard. But people are not buildings, and the family I married into has been leaning on me like I'm a silent column for the last decade. Matthew and I met at a municipal planning summit. He was gentle, articulate, dressed like he cared, and listened like he meant it. We dated for 2 years and married just before his mother's 60th birthday. That should have been a celebration. Instead, it was a checklist. His family sent me dress options, seating charts, and a warning not to upstage the speeches. I thought they were just being careful. I didn't realize it was a preview of how the next 10 years would go. Matthew's family, the Graysons, own a string of boutique properties in the Pacific Northwest, not massive resorts, but elegant, generational, strategically located along scenic highways and lakes. His mother, Samantha, runs most of them. His sister, Emily, manages the social media presence. Connor, his cousin, acts like the COO even though no one gave him the title. It's a tight circle. And from the beginning, I wasn't quite in it. They weren't cruel, not directly. That would have been easier to call out. They were just selectively kind, friendly when it suited them, invisible when it didn't. The first time Samantha introduced me to one of her investors, she didn't say engineer or partner. She said, Matthew's wife. She's quiet but helpful. That word stuck. At family events, I was always slicing fruit, carrying trays, organizing shoes by the door. Once, at Emily's engagement dinner, one of the guests asked if I worked for the catering company. Samantha didn't correct her. She just smiled and said, she's wonderful, isn't she? Matthew never saw it the way I did. He thought they were just set in their ways. They'll warm up, he said. They don't mean anything by it, but meaning isn't always in words. It's in posture, in tone, in who gets invited to speak and who gets asked to serve. I didn't want a stage. I just wanted space. Over time, I stopped asking for it. I buried myself in work, took on more clients, helped municipalities transition to sustainable infrastructure, advised real estate portfolios on high-elevation, resilient strategies. I'd be on Zoom at midnight with people from Zurich and Vancouver while Matthew watched documentaries with his headphones in. We were married, but our lives ran in parallel. His family assumed I was still doing something vague with city codes. They never asked what exactly. That was fine with me. I preferred it that way. Until one winter, we were invited to a Grayson family retreat in British Columbia, a resort perched above a frozen lake. Wood-beamed ceilings, roaring fireplaces, and dinners so formal they had dress codes for dessert. Samantha had rented the entire main lodge. At dinner, I wore a navy blouse and black trousers. Everyone else looked like they stepped out of a ski fashion catalog. Halfway through the second course, one of the guests handed me his glass and asked for more sparkling water. I froze before I could respond. Samantha said, "Oh, Alexa doesn't mind. She's helpful like that." She didn't even look at me. I carried that glass to the bar, smiling like it didn't cut. But that night, I stood outside on the balcony, watching the snow fall. And something shifted. I wasn't angry. I was done. Not with them, with pretending I didn't see it. I stood in the cold until my fingers hurt. Then I walked inside and wrote one line in my notes app, "Buy what they think they own." That was the moment I stopped making excuses, not for them, not for myself. I didn't make a grand announcement the next day. I didn't throw a fit or pull Matthew aside to explain what had happened. Instead, I did what I'd always done best. I took notes. I took notes on how the staff were treated, how Samantha tipped, how Connor flirted with waitresses who were too young and too tired to respond. I observed who called the shots and who expected things to simply appear. On the surface, the Graysons ran a high-end family hospitality business, but underneath, they ran it like a country club passed down by habit, not merit. Decisions were made at dinner tables, not boardrooms. Contracts were skimmed, not read, and the way they treated outsiders, especially staff, told me exactly how they'd treat anyone they didn't consider one of their own. When we returned to Seattle, I didn't tell Matthew what I was planning, not because I was hiding something malicious, but because he never asked. He never asked where I disappeared to every weekend, or why I started flying into Oregon and British Columbia for consulting. He didn't ask why I started spending evenings in spreadsheets instead of watching TV with him, or why I'd spend Sunday afternoons walking through lakeside properties, pretending to be a vacationer. He assumed it was work, and he was right, just not the kind he thought. I started slow. I didn't have millions sitting around waiting to burn. What I had was discipline and time. Over the years, I'd saved aggressively. I'd lived below my means, took on extra project work when others burned out, and reinvested earnings into low-risk portfolios with long-term upside. Most people thought I was frugal because I was cautious, but I wasn't saving for comfort. I was saving for leverage. Through a colleague in British Columbia, I learned of a boutique resort group looking to restructure. One of their lakeside properties had declining bookings, needed capital improvements, and had outdated operations software that made booking a logistical nightmare. But the bones were good: A-frame cabins, deep shoreline views, quiet forestry, just far enough from major highways to feel exclusive but still accessible. I spent 3 months shadowing their team under the guise of helping with infrastructure modernization. What I was really doing was evaluating their leadership pipeline, turnover rate, and the potential for passive management when I was ready. I made a quiet offer through a holding group I'd formed 6 months earlier. The name on the documents wasn't mine. It was Everline Equity Partners. No flashy website, no social presence. Just a clean LLC with capital and intent. The deal closed 6 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone. Not Matthew, not my coworkers, not even the friend who helped me navigate the land zoning paperwork. I kept showing up to my engineering firm like nothing had changed. But at night, I studied staffing reports. I worked with a hospitality strategist to rebrand the resort's offerings. I updated internal systems, contracted a new chef, and restructured seasonal rates. I didn't gut the place. I elevated it, quietly, precisely. And when the next year's Grayson family trip was being planned, Samantha picked the same location she had chosen for the last 5 years. The same resort, mine. There was something poetic about it. watching her book through the new reservation portal I'd approved, seeing her complain about the updated rates, reading an email where she asked if someone could waive the security deposit because we've always been legacy guests. She had no idea who was on the other side of the policy. That was the point. When we arrived, I checked in like everyone else, used my real name, accepted the standard welcome drink, walked into our room like a guest. Even Matthew didn't suspect anything. He noticed the renovations, but assumed the owners had finally decided to reinvest. He mentioned casually that the place felt more corporate now. I smiled and nodded. Let him talk. Let him describe it from the outside. The resort itself had transformed. Cleaner cabins, smarter booking flows, solar panels tucked into the tree line. The restaurant no longer served foie gras or overpriced seafood flown from hundreds of miles away. Instead, we featured locally sourced menus with staff who were paid above industry standard and didn't have to depend on seasonal tips to survive. I didn't tell anyone that the wine list had been curated by a sommelier I personally interviewed, or that the deck's new stonework had been sourced from a quarry I'd visited myself. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about showing off. It was about seeing if it could stand on its own. And it did. On the second night of the trip, Samantha commented to the group during dinner that the staff had gotten noticeably more assertive and that there used to be more perks for returned families. Connor added that the valet was a little too thorough and had asked him to confirm his license. Emily said she missed the old reservation manager who used to give her free upgrades. No one noticed me chewing slowly through my risotto, keeping my eyes on the table, listening without reacting. They didn't know they were describing me. They didn't know the person responsible for every shift they were resisting had been in the room with them all along. And I wasn't about to tell them, not yet. That night, I stood out on the deck again, just like last year, only this time. I wasn't cold. The air was still, the lake glassy, the stars indifferent. My heart wasn't racing, and my hands didn't shake. I wasn't imagining escape. I was planning timing. The morning after their second dinner, I woke up early and walked the grounds with a coffee in hand. Like any other guest, except I wasn't checking for scenery. I was watching service patterns, entry points, timing. The staff passed me with polite nods, professional but warm. Just as we'd trained them, they had no idea I signed their paychecks. That's how I wanted it. Invisible ownership, no flash, no ego, just influence where it mattered. By noon, the Graysons had gathered for brunch on the terrace. Samantha wore her usual cashmere wrap and criticized the table settings. Emily rolled her eyes at the new tablet menus, said they looked too modern. Connor asked 3 different servers why the cocktail options had changed. No one asked why Alexa wasn't talking. No one even noticed I'd been quiet the whole morning. It was like being backstage at a performance I used to audition for, but now I was the one writing the script. That afternoon, Matthew and I walked along the lake path, just the 2 of us. He told me he was thinking about applying for a policy advisory fellowship in Boston. He wanted my opinion. I asked if it was something he really wanted or something that looked good on paper. He paused, said he didn't know yet, then asked if I was happy. I told him I was content. He nodded, seemed to accept it. What I didn't say was that I was calm because I finally had clarity. I wasn't angry at him anymore, just sad at how easy it had been for both of us to live side by side without really knowing each other. That evening, the family dress for the formal dinner, Samantha had selected a black tie rustic theme, which made everyone look like they were headed to a wedding in a catalog ad. I wore a navy slip dress and low heels. Nothing fancy, nothing loud. Emily gave me a once-over and said, "You always go so minimalist. It's your thing." Right, I just smiled. I was past trying to decode passive remarks wrapped in polite tone. That language had expired for me. At dinner, the conversation turned again to the state of the resort. Samantha complained that the fireplace lounges didn't feel as exclusive as they used to. Connor said the staff had gotten too comfortable enforcing rules. Emily sighed dramatically and said she missed the days when the owner would come out and greet us personally, not hide behind managers. That one made me laugh, just a breath, but loud enough that Matthew glanced over. I said nothing. Let the moment settle on its own. Halfway through the entree, our server, Eva, came by to ask about the meals. She was young, smart, detail-oriented. I had hired her personally 6 months ago and trained her myself on wine pairings and guest psychology. She did everything right. She offered refills, smiled warmly, even complimented Samantha's brooch as she walked away. I watched Samantha lean toward Emily and say quietly, "Sweet girl, I just wish they hired someone with a bit more polish for these nights." It wasn't said in cruelty. It was said in habit. That made it worse. Later that night, after dessert, the group lingered by the fire pit. I stayed inside by the window, nursing tea I didn't even want. That's when Matthew walked in. He sat next to me and said, "You've been different this trip." I looked at him and replied, "Or maybe I've just stopped explaining myself." He tilted his head, not offended, just confused. That was the moment I realized he truly didn't know who I had become, and maybe never really had. The following day, Samantha asked me if I could help Eva set up the evening wine tasting. Said it with the same tone she might use asking someone to pass the salt. I didn't answer right away. I looked her in the eye and said, "I think she's got it handled." Samantha blinked, then said, "You're so reliable. Alexa, always quietly getting things done." That was her way of saying, "Stay in your lane." But the thing was, I had left that lane a long time ago. She just hadn't noticed yet. By the end of that day, I had made a decision. I pulled Eva aside and asked if she was ready. She smiled, said, "Whenever you say the word." I nodded. Tomorrow would be the last night of the trip. The family had booked the private lounge for a farewell dinner. I told her to prepare the announcement for the closing toast. She didn't flinch. She just confirmed the phrasing. Back in our room, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself in silence. Not to admire, not to rehearse, just to see. I didn't feel nervous. I felt still, like someone about to pull the curtain on a stage they no longer needed to stand on. Tomorrow wouldn't be revenge. It would be revelation. The final evening arrived with a practiced sense of tradition. Samantha had curated the entire setup down to the floral arrangements and the background playlist. The private dining room was dressed in gold-accented linens, dimmed lighting, and antique silverware that had been in storage for years. It was exactly the kind of setting where people pretended everything was beautiful, even when it wasn't. Matthew helped button the back of my dress in silence. He didn't ask where I had been the last hour, or why I seemed more calm than usual. Maybe he thought I'd finally settled into the rhythm of his family. In truth, I had simply stepped outside of it. As we entered the room, Eva greeted guests with a smile that gave away nothing. She moved confidently from table to table, making sure wine glasses were full and dietary requests were noted. I took my seat near the middle, far enough from Samantha to not be in direct conversation, but close enough to hear everything. Connor made a crude joke about the resort's stricter valet process, and Samantha responded with, "It's like the new owners think we're just regular guests." Everyone laughed, except me. Dinner was a slow, elegant sequence of quiet chewing and layered complaints. Emily whispered about how the welcome basket wasn't as personalized as last year. Matthew asked if anyone had figured out who had bought the resort. He said it lightly, like a trivia question at the end of a long meal. No one had an answer. Samantha guessed it was probably some firm with no soul. Her tone made it sound like soul was something she'd inherited, not something she needed to earn. When dessert was served, Eva stepped toward the center of the room and gently tapped the side of her glass. The sound was light but decisive. Conversations paused. Forks stopped midair. She smiled and said, "Before we conclude this year's farewell dinner, we'd like to take a brief moment to introduce the new majority owner of the property, someone who has played a key role in everything you've experienced this weekend, someone who believes in quiet leadership and long-term investment." Then she turned to me. I stood. The room didn't go silent. It stopped breathing. My heels clicked softly on the wooden floor as I walked toward the head of the table. Samantha blinked, confused. Emily lowered her phone slowly. Connor furrowed his brow like he was trying to remember something important he had never learned. Matthew stared at me like he had just realized we hadn't had a real conversation in years. I picked up the microphone Eva had set on the sideboard. My hand was steady. My voice didn't crack. "Good evening. Some of you know me as Alexa. Some of you don't know me at all. But I know you. I've watched the way you speak to staff, the way you treat privilege like birthright, the way you ignore what doesn't flatter you. And for the last 2 years, I've worked to rebuild this place from the ground up, not to impress you, to correct the silence." Connor coughed. Samantha's glass trembled. Emily turned pale. "I'm the managing partner of Everline Equity, the company that owns this resort, and starting next season, legacy discounts will be reviewed. All guest perks will be merit-based. The rules apply to everyone now." No one clapped. That wasn't the kind of moment this was. I stepped back without waiting for applause and returned the mic to Eva, who simply nodded. I didn't sit back down. I walked past every stunned face and out into the hallway, where the air felt lighter and the silence didn't demand anything from me. My phone buzzed, a message from Eva. That was perfect. I stood by the balcony, watching the frost build slowly along the windows, and let myself feel the weight of the moment, not as revenge, as reality. For years, I had accepted a role I hadn't written. Tonight, I changed the script. The girl they mistook for a maid now owned the walls they were dining inside. The doors behind me opened gently. It was Matthew. He looked pale, searching. "Alexa," he started. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him and said quietly, "You never asked." He swallowed, eyes shining but no tears falling. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. And in that moment, I knew he meant it. That was the real tragedy. Not cruelty, inattention. The slow erosion of curiosity. I didn't respond. I simply turned back toward the glass, where I could still see the flickering candlelight of the table behind us, the one I used to serve from the side. This time, I had no intention of going back. The next morning, I didn't go to the family brunch. I walked the grounds with Eva instead, clipboard in hand, like it was just another operational check. The staff moved with a different energy now, not because of the announcement, but because they felt it in the air. People like Samantha couldn't hide behind politeness anymore. The illusion had cracked, And when illusions crack, it's not always loud. Sometimes it just shifts the weight of a room, like someone rearranged gravity. Guests smiled when they passed me, not out of deference, just clarity. They knew, and they adjusted accordingly. It wasn't until noon that I saw the first sign of fallout. A text from Emily popped up on my phone. It read, "Hey, I think we should talk." I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, a knock on my door. It was Matthew. His face carried the weight of someone who had run out of questions before he ever asked them. He stepped in slowly, as if waiting for me to set the rules. I didn't. I sat on the couch and waited for him to sit too. He did. "Alexa," he started. "This, all of this, how long have you been planning it?" His voice wasn't accusatory, just tired. I looked at him for a moment before answering. "About 2 years," I said. He nodded, staring at the floor like it had more answers than I did. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked again. This time, I responded differently. "Because you never asked. Not once." He blinked like the word stung. "I thought we were in this together," he said, and I replied, "We were, in theory. But you never asked what I needed, what I wanted. You saw me at dinner. You heard the way they talked. You saw the way they overlooked me, and you kept quiet." He opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again. There wasn't a script for this kind of reckoning. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel the need to soften the blow or protect him from the truth. I had always done that. Covered for his silence, smoothed over the edges. But now, I let the stillness speak. He stood up after a while, pacing slowly, then turned to me. "I didn't mean to make you feel invisible," he said. "I guess I assumed, I don't know, that you were okay, that you didn't care as much as I did." I exhaled, not angry, just clear. That's the point. "Matthew, you assumed, and I stopped correcting you." He asked if we were okay. I told him I didn't know. I told him I needed space to see what life looked like without explaining myself every day. He said he understood. I don't think he fully did, but he meant well. That was the hardest part. He wasn't cruel. He just wasn't present. And sometimes, that absence hurts more than hostility. Later that afternoon, I checked the staff email and found a chain from our legal team confirming several irregularities in long-standing family leases. It wasn't surprising. I had suspected for months that Samantha and Connor had been subletting their reserved cabins during peak season without reporting income. The records were clean on paper, but the money trails said otherwise. I didn't feel vindictive reading through them. I felt responsible. I had built a system with rules, and now I had to enforce them. By evening, Samantha had left a voicemail. Her voice was even, maybe too even. "Alexa, I think things got a little out of hand last night. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. We're family. Let's have a real conversation soon, woman to woman." I listened once, then deleted it, because I remembered what she said the year before when I brought a staff intern to a family dinner. She had leaned in and whispered, "People like her tend to get mouthy if you praise them too much. Be careful." That was the real Samantha, not the voice behind the voicemail. I forwarded the subletting records to our compliance director with no note, just the documents. Let the systems work the way they were designed to. I wasn't the angry daughter-in-law anymore. I was the managing partner of a hospitality group, and that meant accountability started with me, even if the names on the leases were personal. That night, I walked alone to the lake and sat on the dock. The water was still, reflecting back a sky that looked exactly the same as the year before, and yet everything beneath it had shifted. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. There's a difference. Triumph fades. Steadiness stays. Back at the lodge, the Graysons had gathered for a final drink in the library. I saw them through the glass doors, talking with softer voices now, unsure who was listening. The power dynamic had flipped, but not because I had taken it by force, because I had built something solid, and now they had to live inside it. The audit process began quietly. That's how real change moves at first, not with noise, but with paperwork. By the middle of the following week, our compliance team had already flagged 2 cabin leases with expired terms being informally renewed through personal arrangements. One of them belonged to Connor. Another was in Emily's husband's name, though she'd been the one subletting it seasonally on private rental platforms. None of it was registered, none of it legal, and all of it traceable. I didn't need to raise my voice or slam a door. I just needed to enforce the standards I had put in place from day one. The notifications were sent out through formal channels. No names, just policies, just timelines, 30 days to comply. No automatic renewal, no special pricing, no unregistered sublets for everyone else. It was standard procedure for the Graysons. It was the first time anyone had ever told them no in writing. Matthew didn't comment when the emails landed. He read his quietly at the breakfast bar and closed his laptop without saying a word. He didn't defend them, but he didn't ask me anything either, and that silence echoed louder than any apology. Emily called twice. I didn't pick up. Then she left a voice note, 5 minutes long, circling the word misunderstanding more times than I could count. She said it wasn't personal, that everyone in the family did things informally, that she didn't think it was a big deal. She even said, come on, it's not like I'm some corporate scammer. I'm family. I didn't respond. I forwarded the voicemail to our legal archive system and moved on to the next review. Connor sent an email, short, clipped, almost passive. He said he thought the family had a historic arrangement and would appreciate it if I honored that spirit moving forward. No apology, just entitlement, wrapped in professionalism. I asked our head of operations to prepare a standard lease termination letter. No emotion, no drama, just clarity. A few days later, Samantha showed up. No call, no warning, just appeared in the reception lobby like it was still hers to enter freely. She wore pearls and a structured coat, makeup just slightly too perfect for a casual visit. She asked to speak privately. I led her into my office, closed the door, and waited. She opened with small talk, then tried to steer into concern. Alexa, I think we've reached a point where things could spiral if we don't reset the tone. This is about family, not contracts. I let her speak for 5 minutes straight. She mentioned reputations, appearances, tradition. She tried to remind me of the holidays we'd spent together, the meals I had helped prepare, the toast she claimed I'd once smiled through. It wasn't a threat. It was nostalgia used like a shield. When she paused, I didn't argue. I simply opened the drawer to my right and placed a sealed envelope on the desk between us. Inside were printed statements, dated screenshots, and emails from 3 former employees who had worked at the resort prior to my acquisition. All 3 had experienced harassment from Samantha directly. One had been called a mouthy little thing in a written memo. Another had documented how Samantha would force staff to serve late after their shift without overtime. All cases had been quietly settled when I took over. Formal apologies had been issued under company name, but I hadn't forgotten. Her hands hovered over the envelope like it might burn her. She didn't open it. She looked at me, carefully, like she was trying to remember if I'd always been this calm. "What do you want?" "Alexa," she asked, not defensive, just cornered. And I told her, "Nothing. I already have everything I came for. This isn't about revenge. It's about alignment. You can live within the rules, or you can leave the table, but you don't get to rewrite the menu anymore." She left without taking the envelope. That told me everything. She wasn't here to reconcile. She was here to reclaim control, and that no longer existed. By the following Friday, the compliance summaries had been finalized. Emily's seasonal income had never been declared properly. The system flagged a discrepancy of over $40,000 in unreported earnings. I didn't press for repayment. I forwarded the data to the appropriate state office and attached a referral to a reputable CPA I'd once consulted with. She would need help, and not from me. Connor's cabin lease was terminated. A nonprofit organization supporting disabled veterans had been on our waiting list for over a year. We awarded them the space, quietly, no press, no spotlight, just a key exchange. They moved in 2 weeks later. Matthew never objected, never defended them, but he also never asked to understand. That's what finally broke something in me. Not the past, not the betrayal, but the absence of any real effort to see. 3 nights after the cabin terminations were finalized, I returned to the resort office just past 7, not to catch up on tasks, but to clear my head. The place had a different weight at that hour. Empty hallways carried every footstep. Light from the glass atrium stretched long across the stone floor. It felt honest, unpolished, like the resort was finally shedding the performance it had been forced to put on for decades. I didn't realize Matthew had followed me until I heard the door close behind me. He stood by the doorway, hands in his pockets, posture stiff, eyes trying not to say too much too soon. "I figured you'd be here," he said. I nodded, didn't ask why. We stood in silence until he walked to the small table in the corner and sat. I joined him. He looked at me like he wasn't sure which version of me he'd find. I saved him the guesswork. "If you're looking for me to undo any of it." "I won't." I said calmly. "I know," he replied. "I wouldn't ask you to." That surprised me more than I expected. He paused, then added, "I've been thinking a lot about how we got here, about what I missed." I waited, not to punish, just to give space. Finally, he said, "I kept thinking I was being respectful by not interfering, by letting things be, but I wasn't neutral. I was absent." That landed harder than he realized, not because it was new, but because it was the first time he'd named it. I told him he hadn't protected them. He'd just faded into convenience. He nodded, quietly. "I thought if I didn't make waves, everything would stay peaceful. I didn't realize the peace was costing you everything." He asked if it was too late. I didn't have a clean answer. I told him I wasn't angry. I told him I wasn't resentful. But I also told him I had changed. And the version of me that used to wait for permission to be seen no longer existed. I wasn't looking to be rescued, reassured, or repositioned. I was simply done waiting for someone to name my value aloud. He said he understood, and maybe he did, but some understandings come too late to act on. The next morning, I emailed our HR team to begin restructuring board-level voting access. I no longer needed input from anyone who had earned their seats through family legacy. We would move toward a merit-based advisory council, rotating seats every 2 years. It wasn't personal. It was necessary. I notified Eva privately. She responded with a quiet thank you and nothing more. That's what I appreciated most about her. No performance, just clarity. By afternoon, I received a call from our legal partner confirming that Lauren, one of Samantha's nieces, had been using the old dining lodge to host paid private events under a false name. The lodge had been temporarily allocated for family use only, but Lauren had been advertising it as a hidden retreat for luxury clients through her own freelance concierge business. She never filed a formal request. She just assumed it would go unnoticed. It hadn't. The security logs and guest parking data told a very different story. I reviewed the findings slowly, making sure I wasn't operating from emotion. Then I issued a formal cease and desist letter through our company counsel. No threats, no accusations, just law. Her reply arrived an hour later, an email full of faux outrage and veiled pleas. "You're really going to burn bridges over a few creative uses of space," she wrote. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Eva with the subject line, "No response required." That night, Matthew and I shared dinner in our suite. Quiet, familiar, almost peaceful. He asked what came next. I told him I didn't know yet, but I wasn't afraid of solitude anymore. He nodded, then said, "If we hadn't come here this year, would you have told me?" I thought for a moment and answered honestly, "Eventually, but I wasn't sure if you'd listen. I'm still not." He didn't push. He just said he wanted to try, and I believed he meant it. I also knew that effort and timing don't always arrive together. Sometimes love survives, but the version of you it loved no longer fits. That's not betrayal. That's transformation. When he went to bed, I stayed awake a little longer. Sitting by the window overlooking the lake, I thought about all the times I'd stood in this same spot, invisible, and now, not only was I seen, I was the frame that held the view. I didn't feel superior. I didn't feel small. I just felt finally right-sized. 3 weeks after that final dinner, the resort settled into a new rhythm. The Grayson family hadn't returned. No formal announcement, no drama, just a quiet absence that left more air in the room. Staff moved with more confidence. Guests began booking based on reviews, not legacy ties. Eva was promoted to operations director, and the team she built was more efficient than I'd imagined. I let them work. I had done what I came to do. Now it was time to build something that could live without me hovering over every decision. I kept my apartment in Seattle, but I started spending more time near the property, not in the main lodge, not in the social spaces, but in a small back cabin I converted into a quiet office. It had no view, no decor worth mentioning, just a wide desk, clean light, and space to think. Sometimes I worked until midnight reviewing long-term investment proposals. Sometimes I sat in silence until the ideas came back. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Matthew moved out quietly. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't ask for explanations. He simply said, "If you ever want to talk, I'll be around," and left his key on the counter. That's how it ended, not with a bang, with a closing door and a soft click behind it. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the last 10 years like a sad montage. I just sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started outlining a new program I had been thinking about for months, something that would actually matter. The Caldwell Women's Fund was born out of everything they once told me I wasn't. It wasn't just a grant initiative. It was a pipeline, housing assistance, business mentorship, legal clinics, career planning, not charity, infrastructure. The name wasn't meant to sound like legacy. It was meant to sound like resistance dressed as order. I named it after my mother, Cecilia Caldwell, the woman who raised me alone in a third-floor apartment that smelled like radiator heat and detergent, the woman who cleaned motel rooms while saving enough to send me to school without asking for help. She never once called herself a victim, but she never got to be the architect of anything either. I announced the program at our winter investor event. No grand party, just a presentation slide, a calm voice, and a slow ripple through the room when people realized I wasn't trying to sound impressive. I was just stating facts, one by one. The old assumptions people held about me fell away, not because I corrected them, but because the facts made them irrelevant. A week later, Samantha emailed me. No pleasantries, just a question. Is the fun something our family can be part of? I read the sentence 3 times. Then I deleted it. I wasn't being cold. I was being honest. The answer was no. This wasn't built to include the people who once excluded everyone else. By mid-February, the final lease audit was complete. 2 more cabins reclaimed. One was reassigned to a nonprofit specializing in nature retreats for children of incarcerated parents. The other became a scholarship residency for women completing re-entry programs after prison. I visited once. During setup, no one recognized me. That was exactly right. Their gratitude didn't belong to me. It belonged to the space I had cleared for them. Some nights, I walked the shoreline of the lake and watched the lodge from a distance. Lights in the windows, laughter spilling faintly through the trees, unfamiliar names on the registration log. That's what healing looks like sometimes. Not everyone clapping for you, just knowing the room didn't collapse when you left, knowing it stood, because you rebuilt the beams yourself. I didn't post about it. I didn't send holiday cards. I didn't give interviews, not because I was hiding, but because I was finally whole, without needing to explain how I got here. That's a kind of freedom no one prepares you for, not being above people, just being beyond their reach. I had spent years building a seat at someone else's table. Now I owned the room, and instead of locking the door, I widened it. Spring came early that year. The trees along the northern path bloomed fast, almost like they had been waiting too long to let go. I found myself waking earlier than usual, walking the perimeter before the first guest stirred. It became a quiet ritual, a way to start the day without announcements or expectations. Some mornings, I crossed paths with a gardener who didn't know who I was. He'd nod once, offer a soft morning, then get back to pruning the hydrangeas like the world depended on it. I appreciated that more than he knew. No titles, no performances, just shared space and clarity of purpose. On the first Monday of April, Darlene arrived. I saw her name on the visitor log the night before. No appointment, no message, just a note in her usual cursive. Coming through for tea. Let's catch up. She never asked if I was free, just assumed, just like she always had. I didn't cancel the slot. I didn't prepare either. I sat at my usual seat in the conservatory lounge, drinking black coffee and waiting to see what she would do when the script didn't bend for her this time. She walked in wearing a cream suit, the same kind she'd worn to investor galas when she used to call me Matthew's support system. Her smile was tight, her tone practiced. She sat down before I could offer, and before I could speak. She started. "I've had time to think," she said. Like that explained anything. And I realize now that things may have looked harsher than they were meant to. I didn't interrupt. She went on. She talked about how family dynamics are complicated, how she didn't always know how to include me, how maybe I had been too sensitive about certain things. But she meant well. That phrase again, meant well, a life's worth of microcuts, all dressed up in civility. I let her finish. Then I placed my cup on its saucer and leaned back slowly. I told her I appreciated the gesture, But I no longer needed clarification. I wasn't looking for an apology. What I wanted, I already had. I had my name on the deed. I had the staff's loyalty. I had the silence of being respected, not tolerated. She paused, like she was waiting for me to soften. I didn't. I asked her if she wanted tea. She shook her head, said maybe next time, then left the way she came in, graceful, controlled, and entirely unable to admit she had finally been made small without anyone raising their voice. Later that week, I met with a new set of grant candidates for the Caldwell Women's Fund. One of them was a single mother who'd left a toxic company job after being repeatedly passed over for promotion. She didn't come in with tears or stories meant to impress. She brought data, a 6-month plan, and a calm fire in her tone that reminded me of someone I used to be. I approved her application on the spot. That same day, I received a forwarded email from our press coordinator. A local publication wanted to feature the anonymous woman behind the resort turnaround. They had guessed a few names. Mine wasn't among them. I replied with a polite decline and asked the article focus on the initiatives, not the individual. I didn't need the story to circle back to me. What mattered was where it led next. That weekend, Eva stopped me near the staff entrance. She looked nervous at first, then handed me a folded card. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, "You changed the way I see leadership, not because you shouted louder, because you never had to." I kept that card tucked inside my drawer next to an old snapshot of my mother, not as proof of who I'd become, but as a reminder of how quietly change arrives when it's built, not performed. By the end of April, the resort hit its highest booking rates in 7 years, not because of aggressive marketing, because word had spread. This place had integrity. The team treated every guest the same. No back doors, no special names, just warmth with structure. That's what people remembered, and that's what kept them coming back. One night, as the sun disappeared behind the lake and the sky turned that deep blue only early spring could manage, I stood on the second-floor balcony of the main lodge. I looked down at the gravel path where Matthew had once stood, waiting to ask if we were okay. I hadn't seen him in 2 months. He hadn't called. Neither had I. That silence felt earned. We hadn't failed. We'd simply run out of illusion. And in that absence, I'd learned that some stories don't need closure in the form of reconciliation. Sometimes the ending is you, still standing, still whole, in the place they once said you'd never belong. 1 year later, almost to the day, the Grayson family returned, not in full, just a few of them, a cousin booking under a different name, an aunt who claimed she was visiting for old time's sake. Even Samantha appeared for a 2-night stay, this time without pearls or posture, carrying herself like someone trying not to draw attention. I didn't stop them. I didn't blacklist them. I let the systems handle them like any other guest. Fair rates, standard service, no hidden favors. It was never about exclusion. It was about balance. On the second afternoon, I stood in the lobby behind the mirrored glass of the security console. It wasn't where I usually spent time, but I had come down to review an upgrade to our guest monitoring system. From that angle, I saw her, Samantha, walking slowly across the tile with her overnight bag. She looked around for someone to greet her. No one rushed, no one whispered. She was just another name on a list. That was all I had ever wanted, to belong or not belong on the same terms as everyone else. After she checked out, the receptionist handed me an envelope. It was addressed to Miss Alexa Chung in her handwriting. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery. No apology, no explanation, just 6 words, written neatly in the center. I see it now. You won. I read it once, then slid it into the drawer of my desk. Not out of sentiment, just as a record, proof that the silence had worked better than any confrontation ever could. Later that week, Eva and I finalized the opening plans for our second location, a reclaimed coastal lodge near Bellingham. Smaller footprint, same values, local staff, climate-aware architecture, community-first programs, no legacy names involved, just clean starts. She asked if I wanted to name any of the cabins. I said no. Let the spaces stay blank. Let the next women who walk through those doors write their own stories. That weekend, I sat on the deck of the main lodge just before dusk. Guests drifted in from nature hikes. Kids raced past with juice cups and tangled shoelaces. One woman in her late 50s sat quietly by the fire pit, watching the lake in the same still way I used to. She wasn't trying to be noticed. She wasn't waiting to be included. She was just there, full, present, untouched by performance. I watched her for a moment, then walked away without saying anything. Sometimes the most generous thing you can give someone is the space to keep their dignity intact. A month later, I was invited to speak at a closed forum for women in ownership roles. They wanted me to share my story. I declined. I said I'd send one of our junior team leads instead. She had built our new training pipeline from scratch and deserved the spotlight more than I did. They replied with surprise. We were hoping to hear from the woman who redefined what silent power can look like in legacy spaces. I wrote back with one sentence. She's right in front of you. You just haven't noticed her yet. Sometimes power doesn't look like a microphone or a headline. Sometimes it looks like turning down the volume in a room you used to shout to be heard in, and realizing it sounds better that way. In early June, Matthew sent a letter, not an email, not a text, a letter, 3 pages, handwritten. He talked about therapy, about self-reflection, about how he finally understood that watching something fall apart quietly doesn't make you neutral. It makes you complicit. He didn't ask for anything, just said he hoped I had found peace. I folded the pages and placed them in the back of a book I kept on my nightstand, a collection of essays about boundaries and rebuilding. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because some chapters close in silence, and that's enough. On the anniversary of my mother's passing, I visited the motel she used to clean. It had changed names, changed ownership, but I still remembered the sound of the mop bucket wheels on the tile, the smell of bleach and cheap coffee, the way she used to hum under her breath like she was keeping herself company in a world that never clapped for women like her. I didn't cry. I didn't linger. I left a white envelope at the front desk with a check large enough to cover every housekeeper's raise for the next 2 years. No name, no message, just a small shift in the system, the kind she never got, but always deserved. That night, I stood in the center of the ballroom at the main lodge, the same place where Darlene once mistook me for help, this time. No one said a word. There was no music, no applause, just silence. And in that silence, I heard my own name in a way I never had before, not spoken, just understood. The truth is, sometimes the people who underestimate you the most give you the clearest blueprint for what needs to change. And if you're lucky or patient enough, you get the chance to build it all in front of them, brick by quiet brick, until they're left standing in a room they no longer recognize, with a version of you they never bothered to see. So now I'll ask you what I once asked myself. If you've ever been made small in a room you helped build, what would it look like to walk back in without apology?